All right, settle in tonight. Find that perfect spot where the world outside fades and the gentle hum of forgotten things can begin to resonate. Tonight, we're not just looking back at history as it's told, but peering into the vast, shimmering expanse of what might have been. We're going to whisper quietly about shadows that stretch across millennia, about names perhaps never known, and about monuments that refuse to yield their deepest secrets. Imagine, if you will, the relentless, uncompromising heat of the Giza Plateau. The sun, a brutal, unblinking eye in the boundless cerulean sky, beats down upon the ancient sands, baking them to a near incandescent shimmer. The air itself seems thick, a shimmering veil of heat haze that dances above the scorched earth, distorting the horizon into an undulating mirage. You can feel it, can't you? That dry, suffocating breath of the desert, catching in your throat, a fine, gray dust clinging to your tongue, coating your skin. It's a place of profound silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind, a dry, ancient sigh that has swept over these very stones for thousands upon thousands of years. And then they emerge in that shimmering heat, colossal and defiant, three mountainous shadows against the horizon. The Great Pyramids. They stand monolithic and immutable, as if born from the very bedrock of the earth, pushed upwards by some unfathomable geological force. You approach them slowly, your footsteps crunching softly on the sun-baked ground, each step bringing into sharper, more terrifying focus the sheer, unyielding scale of these structures. They don't merely impress. They dwarf you. They diminish you. You feel a profound, humbling weight of their presence, an ancient, silent roar that vibrates not through your ears, but deep within your very bones. Each block, a testament to unimaginable toil, is the size of a small car meticulously cut, perfectly placed. The stone, a pale, sun-bleached limestone, seems to absorb the desert light, glowing in inner luminescence at dawn and dusk, then settling into a deep, shadow-laden ochre as the sun climbs higher. Run your hand over the rough-hewn surface. Feel the cool, solid indifference of rock that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of gods, the endless march of generations of fleeting, forgotten humans. This stone has felt the touch of countless hands, some long turned to dust, others yet to be born. It holds a cold, silent memory, a vast, unreadable ledger of time. These are not merely tombs. They are geological events. They are mountains crafted by intent, not by nature. And they have endured. Think about that for a moment. They have stood to the slow, grinding erosion of wind and sand, through the furious, brief tempests that sweep across the desert, through the occasional, bewildered torrents of rain that turn the sands into fleeting rivers. They have defied the relentless gravity of millennia, the insidious creep of time that crumbles civilizations into dust, that turns the grandest ambitions into archaeological footnotes. Conquerors have come and gone, their names etched briefly into the fleeting parchment of history, their empires collapsing like sandcastles before the inevitable tide. But the pyramids remain. They are the ultimate sentinels, standing guard over a secret too vast to comprehend, too old to recall. Our best estimates, our most meticulous archaeological efforts, tell us they were built by the ancient Egyptians, under command of pharaohs like Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, sometime around 2580 to 2560 BC. A truly astonishing feat, we say, for a civilization of that era, using rudimentary tools, immense manpower, and what must have been an almost supernatural will, they somehow managed to haul millions of tons of stone, shape it with incredible precision, and assemble into structures that align with astounding accuracy to the cardinal points and to the constellations above. The mind, even today, struggles to truly grasp the sheer logistical nightmare, the organizational genius, the human cost of such an undertaking. We tell ourselves stories of ramps and sledges, of thousands of workers toiling under the scorching sun, their backs breaking, their lives expendable. We sketch out diagrams, create computer models, and build miniature versions to try and solve the enduring puzzle of their construction. And yet, there remains a persistent, nagging whisper in the back of our collective consciousness, a silent, unsettling question that refuses to be fully answered. How? Not just mechanics, but how a profound knowledge required, the sheer precision that rivals modern engineering, the astronomical alignments that seem almost too perfect for a people without advanced instruments. Look closely at the joint work. Some stones are fitted so tightly, with such microscopic precision, that not even a razor blade can be inserted between them. Think of the millions of individual stones, each one needing to be cut, transported, and placed with this level of accuracy day after day, year after year, for decades. We are told this was done with copper chisels and brute force by people who had not yet discovered the wheel for heavy transport, who work without cranes or advanced pulleys. It stretches credulity, doesn't it? It pushes the boundaries of what we understand about ancient capabilities, about the limits of human ingenuity, when confined by the perceived technological constraints of the time. And this is where our journey begins tonight. This is where we part ways, just for a moment, with the comfortable, well-trodden paths of accepted history. What if that nagging whisper isn't just a romanticized notion or a flight of fancy born of our modern inability to comprehend ancient brilliance? What if it's an echo, a faint, almost imperceptible reverberation from a time so distant, so utterly lost, that its very existence has been scrubbed from the annals of memory, even from the deepest strata of our geological record? What if the Great Pyramids, these immutable sentinels standing defiant against the winds of time, were not built by the pharaohs we know, nor by their subjects, nor by any civilization we have ever truly acknowledged? What if they were already there, ancient and weathered, when the first dynastic Egyptians looked upon them with awe and bewilderment, much as we do today? What if they were the monumental calling cards, the enigmatic Last Testament, of a civilization so advanced, so utterly profound, that their disappearance was not a collapse, but deliberate, almost godlike receding from the stage of human history? Imagine them, a civilization born not in the Fertile Crescent or the Nile Delta as we know it, but in a world that existed before our recorded antiquity. A world perhaps very different, geologically, climatically. A people whose understanding of the cosmos, of mathematics, of engineering, might have far outstripped anything we, even now, truly grasp. They might have understood the very fabric of existence in ways we are only beginning to speculate about in the quiet, dusty corners of theoretical physics. Why would they build such structures? Not as tombs for kings. Perhaps they were enormous power generators, drawing energy from the Earth's resonant frequencies, or from the very fabric of space-time itself. Or maybe they were astronomical observatories, not just marking the constellations, but actively communicating with them, sending signals into the void, or receiving wisdom from afar. Perhaps they were colossal time capsules, designed to preserve knowledge, or even life, through some cataclysmic event they foresaw. Or, and this is a truly unsettling thought, perhaps they were simply markers, grand, silent signposts left behind by a people who knew they would leave, who knew they would be forgotten, but who wished to leave an undeniable stamp of their existence upon the very face of the planet. A final, cosmic "we were here." Consider the implications. If such a civilization existed, then everything we think we know about the origins of human civilization, about the slow, arduous climb from caves to cities, from spears to silicon, will be fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. Our entire timeline of progress will be a carefully constructed fiction, missing an entire magnificent chapter. It would mean that perhaps humanity, or a version of it, has reached pinnacles of knowledge and achievement not once, but twice, or perhaps even many times, only for those peaks to be swallowed whole by the insatiable maw of forgotten time. The thought is both liberating and terrifying, isn't it? Liberating because it opens up the universe to possibilities we rarely dare to entertain, suggesting a grandeur to our past that makes our present seem almost quaint. Terrifying because it reminds us of profound fragility of memory, of history, of even the most enduring monuments. If a civilization so advanced, so capable of monumental construction, could vanish without a whisper, leaving behind only these enigmatic stone mountains, what hope do we have? Our cities, our digital records, our proudest achievements, are they not just fleeting whispers in the cosmic wind, destined to be scoured away by the relentless hand of time, leaving only a few incomprehensible ruins for the next nascent civilization to stumble upon, scratching their heads and muttering, "How?" Tonight, we begin to explore this unsettling, tantalizing possibility. We will gaze upon the unchanging stones of Giza, but this time, we will try to see beyond the accepted narrative, beyond the dusty textbooks, into the silent, echoing void of what might have been. We will let the desert wind carry us back, not just to the pharaohs, but to a time before time, to a people whose names are lost, whose cities are buried under millennia of sand and forgotten seas, but whose legacy, in the form of these colossal, immutable sentinels, continues to challenge every assumption we hold dear. Let the mystery of the Great Pyramids, those silent, stony guardians, unfold before us, not as a solved puzzle, but as the first unsettling clue in a story far grander and far more terrifyingly vast than we ever imagined. The whisper of the desert wind, eternal and indifferent, tells a story far older than any human tongue can articulate. It drifts across the ochre dunes, stirs the ancient sand, and if you listen closely enough, perhaps you can hear the faint, grinding echo of history being built, stone by arduous stone. For centuries, we have looked upon the Great Pyramids of Giza, those colossal silent sentinels, and told ourselves a comforting tale. They were built by the ancient Egyptians, a testament to their ingenuity, their religious fervor, their command over an immense workforce. And indeed, the evidence we have unearthed points to just that. Ramps, sledges, vast armies of laborers, years, even decades of backbreaking toil. Imagine it, if you will, not as a pristine archaeological site, but as a living, breathing, festering wound of human endeavor. Picture the scene. The relentless Egyptian sun, a malevolent eye in the heavens, baking the very air until it shimmered. The stench of sweat, of fear, of stale beer and fresh dung, hanging heavy over the limestone quarries. Thousands upon thousands of human bodies, glistening with effort, their muscles screaming under the strain. A chorus of grunts and curses, the rhythmic slap of bare feet on scorching rock, the occasional, sickening crack of a bone, quickly followed by a short, sharp gasp as another soul joined the silent majority beneath the unforgiving earth. We speak of the precision of the pyramids, their astronomical alignment, the perfect angles of their faces, but we rarely dwell on the horrifying reality of their construction, if indeed they were built by such primitive means. The constant, gnawing hunger in the bellies of the workers, the cracked hands, the sunstroke, the dysentery, the crushing accidents. Each perfectly placed block, weighing upward of 2.5 tons, represents not just a triumph of engineering, but 1,000 untold stories of pain, exhaustion, and premature death. The sand beneath those colossal stones is surely a fine ground mixture of limestone dust and human bone, mingled through millennia. A truly macabre thought to fall asleep to, isn't it? And yet, despite the detailed theories of ramps and the sheer force of human will, a persistent, uncomfortable whisper remains. A faint tremor beneath the scholarly certitude. The sheer scale, yes, the millions of precisely cut and placed blocks. But it's the precision that truly beggars belief for the accepted narrative. The casing stones, once so brilliant they could be seen for miles, were fitted with a tolerance of less than a millimeter. The sides aligned to true north with an accuracy that modern instruments struggle to replicate. The angles, the ratios, the mathematical perfection, all encoded in stone by a civilization we understand to have used simple tools. It feels almost too clean for all that imagined chaos, all that blood and dust and desperate struggle. It's like finding a perfectly crafted, atomic-level supercomputer lying casually discarded in a medieval blacksmith's forge. One wonders if the true builders simply left it there for us to stumble upon, a cosmic joke played across the eons. What if, for a moment, we allow ourselves to entertain a different truth, a darker, more ancient secret buried not just beneath the sand, but beneath the very bedrock of our understanding? What if the shadow stretching across the sands of Giza is not cast by the setting sun, but by the forgotten hand of a civilization so ancient, so advanced, that their very existence has been erased from the annals of time? A civilization not merely predating the pharaohs, but predating even the concept of what we call history. A precursor race, perhaps, who built the pyramids not with grunting laborers and crude tools, but with a knowledge of physics and energy that makes our modern science look like clumsy finger painting. Let us call them, for the sake of quiet contemplation, the architects of the unseen. Imagine a people or beings who existed in a verdant, vibrant North Africa millennia before the encroaching desert claimed it, a world where the Nile was a sprawling network of arteries, and where lush forests carpeted the land that is now arid wasteland. The architects of the unseen did not build with sweat and tears, but with profound understanding of the vibrational resonance of matter. They didn't cut stone, they persuaded it. The massive limestone blocks, each a mountain in miniature, were not hewn by chisels, but coaxed in the earth with a humming, inaudible frequency, a silent song that loosened their bonds and allowed them to be lifted with an effort that was barely an afterthought. Picture it. No straining backs, no snap ropes, no desperate cries. Only a serene silence, broken perhaps by the faintest, almost imperceptible hum that resonated deep within the earth, a sound that bypassed the ear and vibrated in the bones. The colossal blocks would rise, not dragged or levered, but floating with an eerie, graceful slowness, guided by an unseen force, settling into place with a soft click of perfectly aligned cosmic gears. Their technology wasn't based on mechanical leverage or brute force, but on an elegant mastery of energy fields, of gravity manipulation, of the very quantum fabric of existence. They would have watched, not with whips and scowls, but with a calm, almost attached focus, as the immense structures manifested before them, not through exertion, but through precise, intellectual design and application of fundamental forces. And why did they build them, these architects of the unseen? Not as tombs for mortal kings, obsessed with the next life, but for purposes far grander, far more existential. Perhaps the pyramids were vast energy conduits, tapping into telluric currents or transmitting data across interstellar distances. Maybe they were colossal time capsules, designed to preserve knowledge through a coming cataclysm that they foresaw with chilling clarity. Or perhaps, and this is truly chilling, they were simply markers, monuments to their own passing, a final, poignant signature on a world they were preparing to leave behind, a silent warning or a forgotten message, etched into the landscape for any future intelligence, any lesser intelligence to ponder and utterly misunderstand. The architects of the unseen were not bound by our petty squabbles, our territorial disputes, or our insatiable greed. Their motivations were pure, their intellect vast, their methods beyond our current comprehension. They existed for an epoch, leaving no other trace beyond these enigmatic structures. No cities of their own, for perhaps they did not need them. No artifacts, for their tools were not physical, but energetic. They built the pyramids, watched them rise, and then, perhaps, simply faded, vanished without a trace, not through war or famine or plague, but through a transcendence, a quiet departure, or a gradual, elegant dissipation into the very fabric of the universe, leaving behind only these colossal riddles, these petrified whispers of forgotten age, to tease and confound the tiny, struggling civilizations that would one day crawl from the mud and claim these marvels as their own. Imagine the irony. The pharaohs, in their gilded arrogance, simply found these structures standing, ancient even to them, and in their monumental vanity, claimed them. They repurposed them, carved their names into their surfaces, believing themselves to be the original architects of these impossibilities. While the true builders, the architects of the unseen, watched from the silent ether, or perhaps from beyond the veil of reality, a silent, knowing smile playing on their unseen lips. The Great Pyramids, then, are not just structures. They are a profound, unsettling absence, a shadow across the sands, forever concealing the true light of their origin. And perhaps that is the most terrifying truth of all. And so, we are left to ponder these towering enigmas, not merely as tombs for long-dead pharaohs, but as monumental questions etched in stone against a vast canvas of the desert sky. If the conventional wisdom feels for a moment like a comfortable, well-worn blanket that doesn't quite cover all the cold spots, then perhaps we might allow ourselves to slip into a different kind of thought, a quieter, more speculative one. What if the builders were not the ancient Egyptians, as we understand them, but a predecessor, an echo from a time before time, a civilization lost to the very sands that now cradle their most magnificent, and indeed, most baffling creation? Imagine for a moment, not the familiar scene of throngs of sweating laborers pulling colossal stones across grease tracks, nor the methodical hammering of copper chisels against granite. Instead, consider the architects of the impossible. These would not be a people confined by our known metallurgy or our understanding of physics. They would be an advanced civilization, perhaps one whose advancements were not in the realm of steam engines or silicon chips, but in a profound, almost mystical understanding of the earth itself, of energy, of sound, or the very fabric of matter. Their knowledge might have been less about technology as we conceive it, and more about the manipulation of natural forces, a mastery so complete it appears to us as magic. Picture them, then, not as frantic overseers with whips, but as quiet, deliberate figures moving through an unblemished landscape. Their methods, utterly alien to our understanding, would have allowed them to quarry the multi-ton blocks of limestone and granite from distant sources with an unsettling ease. Consider the granite from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. For conventional builders, this journey alone was an epic saga of barges, ropes, and unimaginable toil. For our architects, perhaps the very composition of the stone was understood at a fundamental level, allowing it to be coaxed from its bedrock without the need for crude chisels. Perhaps they employed resonant frequencies or focused energies to cleanly separate immense sections, detaching them from the earth with a low hum that vibrated through the very bones, rather than the deafening clang of tools. Once liberated from the earth, these monolithic components, weighing upward of 70 tons for the largest roofing beams, and even more for the foundation stones, would need to be transported. The mind recoils at the scale of such an undertaking. Our historical record suggests vast armies of men, lubing the ground with oil, perhaps even using a primitive form of rolling logs. But the architects of the impossible might have moved them differently. Imagine the air around the stone shimmering slightly, the ground beneath them barely disturbed as they glided, almost floating across the desert floor, not propelled by brute force, but by an understanding of gravity or magnetic fields that we have long forgotten, if we ever knew it. The only sound, perhaps a low, sustained hum, a vibration that promised immense power, offered no hint of friction or struggle, no strained sinews, no splintering wood, just the silent, inexorable movement of stone giants across a flat, empty plain. And then the raising, the stacking of 2.5 million blocks, each weighing on average 2.5 tons, the heights that scrape the clouds. Our contemporary theories, even the most ingenious, struggle to account for the perfect alignment, the razor-thin seams, the placement of the colossal granite beams in the king's chamber high within the pyramid's core. For our architects, this would have been a matter of precision, not struggle. They would have possessed a grasp of geometry and astronomy that made our most sophisticated laser levels seem like crude measuring tapes. Each block would have been eased into its exact position, not with the agonizing creak of timber and rope, but with an almost imperceptible shift, guided by an unseen force, settling into place with gentle, final click that echoed the mathematical perfection of their design. The air would be filled not with the shouts of foremen, but with a quiet, focused intensity, the soft murmur of instructions given, perhaps through telepathic means or a language of pure thought. The labor force for such an endeavor would also differ profoundly, not necessarily slaves shackled by iron, but perhaps a devoted populace, organized with an efficiency so absolute it bordered on the terrifying, or a genetically engineered workforce, bred for specific tasks, uncomplaining, tireless, their lives given over entirely to the monumental project. Or, even more chillingly, perhaps the architects themselves were not human in the way we understand it, but beings of pure intellect, directing an automated or bioengineered construction crew, their every movement precise, their every action devoid of the messy, unpredictable emotions of human toil. The dust would still rise, of course, a fine, golden powder settling over everything, a testament to the slow erosion of the very landscape, but without the sweat and grime of human exertion. The duration of such a project would stretch across centuries, even for these advanced beings. Not 20 years or 80 years, but perhaps even longer, a multi-generational endeavor that became the central pillar of their civilization's existence. Their very purpose, perhaps, was encoded within the structure, a cosmic clock, a power generator, a library of lost knowledge, or simply a monument to their own fleeting dominance over the planet. And when it was complete, when the final capstone gleamed like a polished diamond against a merciless sun, perhaps they simply faded away, not through catastrophe or war, but through a deliberate, silent withdrawal, leaving behind only the grand, enigmatic structures as a final, baffling whisper to future civilizations. They would have built the impossible, achieved the unimaginable, and then, without so much as a final ripple, dissolved back into primordial silence from which they might have emerged, leaving us, centuries later, to stare up at their impossible legacy and wonder, in the still, hot desert air, just who they were. And so, we are left with this titanic riddle. How? How were these mountains of stone, these geological impossibilities, brought into being? The answer, perhaps, lies not in the final ascent of the blocks, but in their very origin, in the raw, unyielding heart of the earth. Imagine, if you will, not the sleek, finished edifice of the pyramid, but the chaotic, sun-baked landscape of the quarry. For every majestic block that now stands sentinel, silent witness to millennia, there was a hole in the ground, a wound in the earth's crust, and the ghost of countless hours of unimaginable toil. The genesis of the stone, its very birth from the living rock, was a symphony of agony, dust, and monotony that could drive a saint to madness. Let us speak first of the most common material, limestone. The bulk of the Great Pyramid, some 2.3 million blocks, is made of this relatively soft, yellowish-white rock, quarried primarily from the Mokattam Hills, just across the Nile from Giza. Specifically, the finest quality, the glistening white casing stones that once gave the pyramids their ethereal glow, came from the Tura quarries, renowned for their purity. Think of it, not just any limestone, but the best. Even a forgotten civilization with fantastical means would, presumably, prefer quality materials. After all, you wouldn't build a monument to outlast eternity with shoddy work, would you? Unless, of course, their eternity was considerably shorter than ours. A thought for another time, perhaps. The Tura quarries themselves were not grand, open pits as one might imagine, but rather a series of tunnels and galleries burrowing deep into the hillside. This provided a modicum of shade from the relentless Egyptian sun, a brief reprieve for those condemned to spend their lives chipping away at the very bones of the earth. The air, thick with dust, would have shimmered with heat, even underground. Breathing it day in, day out was a slow, deliberate form of occupational hazard, leading to lungs that would, in time, resemble desiccated sponges. A rather final career move, one might say. The tools of extraction for limestone were deceptively simple, yet brutally effective. Copper chisels, blunted quickly but resharpened with grim regularity. Wooden mallets, splitting and cracking under the strain. And perhaps most importantly, determination, fueled by whatever meager rations were offered, and the knowledge that the alternative was often worse. Blocks were cut by first carving channels around the desired section of rock, a laborious process of hammering and scraping. Once isolated on 3 or 4 sides, wedges of dry would be driven into cracks. Water, precious and life-sustaining, would then be poured over these wedges. As it would slowly absorb the water, it swelled, exerting immense pressure, with a groan that resonated through the rock, and perhaps through the very souls of those who waited. The stone would finally split. A triumph, certainly, but one quickly overshadowed by the next identical block awaiting its violent birth. But limestone was just the beginning. For the burial chambers, the grand galleries, and the magnificent, often puzzling, internal structures, a harder, more enduring stone was required. Granite. And for granite, one had to journey far, far south, to the legendary quarries of Aswan, hundreds of miles upriver. This was not a short commute. It was an expedition, an undertaking that speaks volumes about the meticulous planning, or perhaps the sheer, unhinged ambition of those who commanded this enterprise. Granite, unlike limestone, does not yield to a simple chisel and a splash of water. It is igneous rock, formed from molten magma, tough, unyielding, and utterly indifferent to human suffering. The primary tools here were not metal, but rock itself. Spherical dolerite pounding stones, weighing anywhere from 5 to 15 pounds, were used to literally hammer the granite into submission. Imagine hundreds, thousands of men, standing shoulder to shoulder, each with a heavy stone in hand, relentlessly pounding the surface of the granite, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. The sound would have been deafening, a constant, rhythmic thud, a dull, resonant concussion that echoed across the vast, open quarry like a heartbeat of a tired god. This was not precision work in the initial stages. This was brute force, applied with monotonous discipline. The dolerite pounders would slowly, excruciatingly, crush and abrade the granite, creating a trench around the desired block. As the trench deepened, the men would have to squat, then kneel, then lie flat, still pounding, until the block was outlined on all accessible sides. For the underside, techniques are debated. Undermining, levering, or perhaps an almost surgical degree of patience as the quarrymen meticulously carved beneath. The dust in these granite quarries would have been finer, sharper, white powder clinging to sweat-soaked skin, embedding itself in every pore, every lung. It was a landscape of perpetual, back-breaking agony, framed by the indifferent vastness of the desert sky. And what of the human element? It is easy to speak of men or workers, but these were individuals. They sweated, they bled, they swore, they wept. They endured the stinging flies, the scorching sun, the gnawing hunger, the ever-present thirst. Many would have arrived as robust young men and left. If they left at all as broken husks, their bodies ravaged by the endless exertion, their spirits perhaps crushed by the sheer, unyielding scale of the task. Accidents were not incidents. They were probabilities. A dropped stone, a slipping lever, a collapsing trench. Each a potentially fatal encounter with the unyielding will to rock. Now, in a forgotten civilization, one supposedly possessing knowledge far beyond our ken, were behind these monumental efforts. How would their stone's genesis differ? Perhaps they wielded tools of unknown composition, instruments that could cleave granite with a silent hum, or dissolve limestone with a whispered command. The thought is tantalizing, isn't it? A cleaner, more efficient, perhaps less brutal extraction. But even then, the laws of physics, of mass and volume, remain. You still have to move the stone. And the sheer number of blocks, the literal mountains of them, implies an industrial output that beggars belief regardless of the technology. Or perhaps, and this is the more unsettling thought, their methods were not technologically advanced, but socially so. Perhaps their genius lay not in futuristic tools, but in a perfected system of human resource management, one so ruthlessly efficient, so utterly dehumanizing, that it makes the known ancient methods look like a quaint artisanal workshop. A level of bureaucratic indifference that would make a modern HR department blush. Imagine a civilization that truly understood how to extract the absolute maximum output from every single living being, day in and day out, with an efficiency that was both terrifying and sublime. For the genesis of the stone wasn't just geological, it was existential. It wasn't just about digging a hole. It was about tearing apart the very fabric of existence for countless individuals, transforming their lives into a relentless, repetitive cycle of hammering, cutting, lifting, and hauling, whether by copper chisel or by some unknown sonic pulverizer, whether by the sweat of the brow or the drone of an ancient, forgotten machine. The stone had to be born from the earth, and its birth was a violent, dusty, and infinitely laborious affair, leaving behind not just empty quarries, but the ghosts of untold suffering, etched into the very silence of the desert. These were the first steps, the very first breaths of the pyramids, and they were in their own way as mysterious and as harrowing as the finished structures themselves. And so, we turn our gaze not to the bustling courts of pharaohs, but to an age far, far older, an age when the sands of what we now call Giza were not yet scarred by the endless pilgrimage of tourists, but by the desperate, shuffling feet of a people who had no name for themselves, no concept of history, only the brutal, immediate present and the colossal, utterly alien structures that loomed over their lives. Imagine, if you will, a time before the Nile's predictable floods had birthed the idea of a unified kingdom, before hieroglyphs scratched their elegant lies onto stone, before even the rudimentary understanding of bronze, when the sharpest edge was still chipped flint and the longest lifespan was a cruel joke. This was the dawn of human struggle, and into this harsh landscape, already ancient, already utterly defined the sun, stood the pyramids, not as monuments, but as mountains, mountains that bled no ore, sheltered no game, and spoke no language, only the language of impossible geometry and a silence so profound it felt like a scream. These colossal constructs were not built by the hands we imagine, not by the whips of taskmasters over the backs of slaves, nor by the organized genius of an empire. Oh no, they were already there. Just there. When the earliest scattered tribes, more animal than man, stumbled upon them, they must have seemed like scars on the face of the world, left by gods, or by something far less comprehensible, something that didn't just walk the earth, but shaped it with an effortless, terrifying precision. They were the remnants of civilization that had not simply faded, but had been erased meticulously, leaving only these geometric ghosts. A civilization whose existence left such an indelible mark that it paradoxically ensured its own erasure from all memory. For who could comprehend such power? Better to forget, to reassign, to attribute to mere mortals later. And so they did. But before the convenient amnesia, there was life beneath the Colossus, a life defined, utterly and irrevocably, by the omnipresent, unblinking eyes of the Great Pyramids. For those early, desperate humans, the structures weren't just landmarks, they were the very horizon. Every sunrise painted their immutable faces in orange and gold. Every sunset swallowed them in long, deepening shadows. They dictated the flow of wind, creating strange, chilling currents even in the fiercest heat. They held the moisture of the dawn, releasing it slowly, offering meager patches of dew-kissed reeds that were more valuable than gold. They were an unyielding, silent presence, a constant reminder of the incomprehensible. These were a people who, if they had a name for themselves, it has long since crumbled to dust. Their settlements were crude affairs, huddles of sun-baked mud bricks, woven reeds, and the occasional scavenged, perfectly cut stone block, fallen like a strange sea from the feet of the giants. Imagine the despair try to raise a wall against the elements when, a mere stone's throw away, stood walls of a scale and precision that defied every known law of physics, crafted from materials harder than any they could ever chip or shape. What was the point of human endeavor when faced with such an overwhelming testament to otherness? Their lives were short, brutal, and punctuated by fear. Fear of the lean season, fear of the desert predators, and a unique, pervasive fear of the pyramids themselves. They were not temples to be worshipped, not in the way we understand. They were something far more primal. A sleeping beast, an unmovable curse, a silent judge, offerings of meager grains, of freshly caught fish, even the occasional desperately needed child, were left at their bases, not out of devotion, but out of a desperate, superstitious hope to appease whatever immense, unknowable force still lingered within their stone hearts, to prevent the Colossus from waking, or perhaps simply to not be noticed by it. Children grew up knowing nothing else. Their earliest memories would be the sharp angles cutting the impossibly blue sky. Their play, crude dolls fashioned from reeds, would often revolve around mimicking the strange, unmoving sentinels. They would whisper tales of light seen within the darkest crevices, of chilling hums that vibrated to the ground on moonless nights, of strange geometric patterns that seemed to shift on the stones if you stared too long in the midday sun. Most of these were likely the fevered imaginings of minds grappling with the unexplainable, but some might have been echoes of the builders themselves. Residual energies, forgotten safeguards, the last dying breaths of a hyper-advanced power source. Who could say? The children, however, were quicker to see the patterns, to hear the whispers, before the grinding weariness of adulthood dulled their senses. Adult life was a constant, back-breaking struggle for survival. The pyramids were a stark backdrop to every meager triumph and every crushing defeat. A successful hunt, bringing a rare feast of gazelle, was celebrated in their shadow. A child lost to fever, a family wiped out by a raiding party. Their brief existences were snuffed out under the unwavering gaze of the vast, indifferent structures. The pyramids neither gave nor took, they simply were. And in their very being, they diminished the human struggle to something utterly pathetic. What was a lifetime of toil, of love and loss, of desperate hope, when compared to the eons the silent giant had already stood and would undoubtedly continue to stand. It was a dark humor, if you squinted hard enough, seeing humanity's fragile pretensions laid bare against such a backdrop of eternal, unknowable power. A mosquito trying to build a nest on the face of a mountain range. They scavenged, of course, not from within the pyramids themselves. Only the truly mad or the utterly desperate dared to breach their foreboding entrances, and few ever returned. And those who did, returned changed, eyes wide with a horror no language could articulate, minds shattered by what they glimpsed, or perhaps by the sheer, empty silence that swallowed all sound within the labyrinthine passages. No, they scavenged from the periphery, bits of strange, perfectly smooth rock, unlike any natural stone, that occasionally chipped off and lay half buried in the sand. Unidentifiable fragments of what might have been tools or implements, impossibly hard, impossibly light, that held no resemblance to anything they knew. They would wear these fragments as amulets, not for beauty, but for the vague, lingering sense of power they seemed to exude. Or perhaps just for the morbid fascination of holding a piece of something that should not exist. Their language, a collection of guttural sounds and hand gestures, contained no word for future beyond the next sunrise, and certainly no word for past beyond the last full moon. How could they? The past was the pyramids. It was so vast, so unfathomable, that it simply was. There was no before the pyramids in their collective consciousness. Only with the pyramids, they had become the very fabric of their reality. Their myths, if they had any, would have been about the giant, silent beast that drank the light, or the sleeping god of stone that held the sky from falling. As generations flickered and died, like fragile desert flowers in a relentless sun, the collective memory blurred. The whispers of things that hummed or lights that floated became garbled, distorted into vague superstitions about angry spirits or helpful jinns. The true origin of the pyramids, the very concept of builders, began to erode under the sheer weight of time and the human inability to comprehend such a scale. It was simply too big for their small, struggling minds to process. Easier, always easier, to simply accept them as they were, a permanent fixture of the desolate landscape, a testament to forgotten age, built by no one, yet overshadowing everyone. A chilling, silent prologue to the grand, self-congratulatory tales of later civilizations. The first act of a story whose true authorship would forever remain lost in the sand and the unbearable silence. And the people living beneath them, little more than footnotes, fading even before the ink was dry. Their lives, beneath the colossus, a fleeting whisper against the roar of eternity. And so, we are left with these impossible geometric mountains, thrusting their silent questions into the indifferent desert sky. The conventional wisdom, whispered in air-conditioned museums and textbook margins, posits them as tombs, grand, ostentatious resting places for pharaohs, their organs carefully dried, their bodies swaddled in linens, awaiting an eternal dawn that, for the most part, never quite arrived as intended. But if these monolithic structures were indeed the handiwork of civilizations so utterly lost to our collective memory, a people whose mastery of forces we can only dimly perceive, then the notion of a glorified burial chamber feels, well, rather quaint, almost insultingly simplistic. Imagine, if you will, dedicating a significant portion of your civilization's ingenuity, labor, and precious resources that would otherwise fuel wars, feed famines, or simply pave the roads of daily life. To construct a stone box for a single deceased individual is an act of profound, almost comedic vanity. And while ancient potentates certainly had their moments of excessive self-importance, the sheer scale of the pyramids of Giza, their terrifying precision, the enduring mystery of their construction, screamed something far grander, far more desperate, or perhaps far more chillingly practical. What if the purpose of these colossal constructs wasn't about laying the dead to rest, but about awakening something, or perhaps keeping something eternally asleep? Consider, for a moment, the possibility that these weren't tombs at all, but vast, intricate machines. Not machines of gears and pistons, but of resonance and energy. Picture the raw, untamed forces of the cosmos, the silent, omnipresent hum of the Earth's core, the unseen currents of the planetary magnetic field. What if this forgotten civilization, with their enigmatic understanding, had found a way to harvest these energies? The pyramids, then, would not be monuments, but titanic capacitors, drawing power from the very fabric of existence. Imagine the air around them, not still and dusty, but alive with a low thrum, a vibration that would set your teeth on edge, making the tiny hairs on your arms stand erect. Perhaps the Great Pyramid, with its precise angles and material composition, acted as an immense tuning fork, resonating with a frequency that could be manipulated, a frequency that could perhaps tear the very air or knit it back together. The grimy laborers, the ones we rarely consider in our romanticized versions of history, would have felt it first. Not the strain of the ropes, not the biting sand, but a deeper, unsettling vibration in their bones, a constant, low-frequency hum that burrowed into their skulls. Perhaps some succumbed to it, their minds slowly unraveling, their bodies growing weak, their sanity flaking away like sun-baked clay, all in service of a power they could never hope to comprehend. The stories of curses, of madness descending upon those who disturb the pharaoh's rest, suddenly take on a far more visceral, terrifying reality when you consider them as a lingering echo of an energy field that boiled brains or simply drove men insane. A silent, invisible predator waiting. Or perhaps these structures were designed for communication, not just across continents, but across the vast, indifferent gulfs of space and time. Imagine a civilization peering into the infinite, desperate to find an echo of life, a whisper of understanding from the cosmic darkness. The pyramids, then, might be enormous antennae, their carefully chosen materials and geometric forms creating precise frequency, a beacon fired into the void. Think of the isolation of those tasked with operating such devices, day in, day out, staring at star charts no human I could ever fully decode, listening to static that promised enlightenment or utter silence. The dark, cramped chambers not for a king's eternal slumber, but for lonely operators, hunched over consoles of polished obsidian, their fingers tracing alien symbols, their eyes strained from watching unseen currents flicker across strange, luminous displays. What did they hear? The cold, mathematical silence of an empty universe? Or did something finally answer back? A voice from the black, perhaps, that shattered their minds with sheer alien grandeur. And what if their purpose was more dire, more desperate? What if the pyramids were not about reaching out, but about holding on? Consider a dying world, not ours, but theirs. A slow, agonizing demise brought on by a fading sun, a poisoned atmosphere, or a cataclysmic alignment of celestial bodies. The pyramids, then, become monumental data vaults, colossal libraries carved not onto fragile papyrus or brittle clay tablets, but into the very stone itself. Every meticulously placed block, every precisely measured angle, every echoing chamber, a repository of their entire civilization's knowledge, their history, their science, their art, their very essence. An attempt to cheat oblivion, to ensure that something of them survived, even if only as an inert, undecipherable message for a future species too primitive to ever truly grasp its significance. Imagine the weary, skeletal figures, their faces caked with dust and desperation, carving endless equations, narratives of forgotten triumphs and failures, into the unforgiving rock, knowing that the sands of time and the coming cataclysm might render all their agonizing effort utterly moot. A colossal, beautiful, and utterly heartbreaking monument to a species staring its own extinction in the face. The dark humor of it all lies in our persistent belief that such structures must be about death, when they might have been about life, or the desperate, final struggle for life. We impose our own rather morbid fascination with mortality onto these silent giants. Perhaps they were not built for dead kings, but for living data, a vast, non-digital hard drive storing the collective consciousness of civilization, waiting for a hypothetical reboot. Or perhaps storing the very essence of their people, a form of biological or digital stasis, waiting for eons to pass until conditions were favorable for their reawakening. Picture the sealed chambers not as empty spaces, but filled with shimmering, almost imperceptible mist, a slow, gentle hum, preserving legions of the forgotten, suspended in eternal, dreamless sleep, their very existence unknown to the tiny, ephemeral creatures who now crawl over their outer shells. The reason their true purpose remains shrouded, then, becomes horrifyingly clear. If they were machines, they broke down. If they were communication devices, no one answered, or the answer was too terrible to comprehend. If they were data vaults, the key was lost or the language forever forgotten. And if they were arks, then the passengers never woke, or awoke to a world so alien, so diminished, that they simply vanished into the new desolation. The sands themselves, the relentless, unforgiving grains of the desert, have conspired with the cruel hand of time to erase the critical clues, perhaps the crucial mechanisms, The control panels, the interpretive texts, were made of materials that simply didn't last as long as stone. Or perhaps they were deliberately removed, dismantled, or destroyed by the very architects to ensure that their secrets remained inviolable, lest the knowledge fall into the wrong, less evolved hands. A dangerous, double-edged sword, preserving knowledge by making it utterly inaccessible. And this, perhaps, is the most chilling possibility of all, that their purpose is shrouded not merely by the passage of time or the caprice of the elements, but by a deliberate act, an intentional obfuscation. They built these monuments of unknowable function, and then, for reasons we cannot begin to fathom, they vanished, leaving behind only the grand, perplexing silence. They left us with structures that defy our understanding, inviting endless speculation, endless theories, each one a testament to our profound ignorance. They left us to wander around their magnificent, silent relics, like ants crawling over a discarded, incomprehensible alien device, wondering if it's a weapon, a toy, or merely a very elaborate, terribly permanent, and utterly inscrutable piece of art. The pyramids don't whisper their secrets. They simply are, and in that terrifying, enduring silence lies the true weight of their unknowable purpose, a purpose that, for all our digging, all our measuring, all our theorizing, remains perpetually beyond our grasp, forever just out of reach, humming faintly in the back of our minds, a tune we can almost hear, almost understand, but never quite articulate. And that, perhaps, is exactly how they wanted it. And so, we are left with these impossible monuments, these gargantuan whispers of a world that predates our convenient timelines. Imagine, if you will, the architects of these titans, not the sun-drenched, papyrus-scribbling pharaohs we know, but someone else entirely, someone whose understanding of forces, of materials, of the very fabric of existence, far outstripped anything we could conceive of in that fledgling epic. They built not just with stone, but with a silent, profound knowledge that allowed them to shape mountains into geometric elegies. But even the most formidable civilizations, the most enlightened societies, are ultimately tethered to the fragile realities of their planet. And for this forgotten people, a slow, insidious change began to creep across their meticulously ordered world. It wasn't the sudden, fiery wrath of a meteor, nor the earth-shattering convulsion of a superquake, though such things certainly have a dramatic flair. No, their undoing was far more insidious, far more boring in its relentless inevitability. The whispers began subtly, a less abundant harvest here, a deeper, more prolonged dry season there. The Nile, that lifeblood artery of their existence, began to betray them. Its annual inundation, once a predictable, benevolent surge of fertility, grew erratic. Sometimes it would shrink to a pathetic trickle, leaving vast stretches of their cultivated lands to bake into cracked, dust-blown pottery. Other times, it would swell with an unpredictable ferocity, drowning the very fields it was meant to nourish, carrying away painstakingly constructed irrigation systems in a muddy, indifferent embrace. The meticulously engineered sluice gates, once precise instruments of control, became either redundant monuments to a forgotten bounty or overwhelmed relics of a lost war against nature. The skies, once a predictable canvas of cerulean, began to deepen with a perpetual haze of ochre, fine, omnipresent dust, carried on winds that grew increasingly fierce and relentless, began to coat everything. It sifted into their homes, grated against their teeth, and slowly, irrevocably, choked the life from the very plants and animals upon which their complex society depended. Imagine trying to maintain a society built on precision, on grand, lasting works, when every breath you take is gritty, every meal is meager, and the very air feels like a slow, pulmonary assault. One can only assume their meticulously crafted calendars, one so precise in charting celestial movements and agricultural cycles, began to feature an alarming number of entries for dust storm, extreme, and water rationing, critical. The elegance of their astronomical observations was slowly eclipsed by the stark reality of terrestrial survival. As the land withered, so too did the social fabric. The grand public works, the monumental pyramids themselves, which had once been symbols of their collective power and spiritual reverence, began to take on a different resonance. They shifted from affirmations of mastery over the earth to defiant, desperate gestures against an unraveling world. Resources, once seemingly infinite in their skilled hands, grew scarce. The quarrying operations, which had once churned out colossal blocks with effortless grace, became grimmer affairs. Every chiseled fragment, every strained lift, was now a desperate prayer, an act of sheer will against a mounting futility. The population, once robust and thriving, began to thin, not with a dramatic, cinematic sweep of plague, but with a quiet, persistent ache of malnutrition and disease brought on by scarcity. Children, once the joyful inheritors of this advanced knowledge, became gaunt, their eyes too old, too vacant. The vibrant rituals, the complex societal dances, began to fray at the edges, replaced by the hushed desperation of survival. Their vast libraries, perhaps inscribed on materials we've never encountered or simply swept away by the omnipresent dust, would have held the accumulated wisdom of millennia. Yet, what good is a treatise on stellar navigation when your stomach gnaws with hunger? What solace can be found in philosophical debates when your neighbors are dying of thirst? As their world constricted, their focus would have narrowed. The grand, outward-looking curiosity that once propelled them to engineer marvels and chart cosmic pathways would have devolved into a grim, immediate struggle for existence. Perhaps the last great stones were laid not in devotion to some cosmic principle, but in a desperate attempt to create a final, impregnable sanctuary, a defiant middle finger to the encroaching desolation. Or perhaps they were simply the last acts of a people too proud, too accustomed to their own meticulous order, to simply lay down and die in the sand. A kind of stubborn, elegant refusal to abandon the habit of greatness, even as greatness slipped through their fingers like fine desert sand. The social order, once so rigid and efficient, would have buckled under the strain. The specialized craftsmen, the engineers, the scholars, their unique skills became less vital than the ability to find water, to scavenge for sustenance. The beautiful, intricate objects they created, once symbols of status and cultural depth, would have been discarded or repurposed, perhaps melted down for practical tools, their aesthetic value forgotten in the desperate scramble for survival. One can imagine the quiet, grim despair of a master artisan, whose hands once shaped granite into impossible symmetries, now clumsily attempting to construct a crude shelter from scavenged reeds. This wasn't a sudden cataclysm. No, this was a slow, inexorable tightening of the screw. A society, built on the foundations of abundance and mastery, slowly suffocating under a blanket of dust and deprivation. Their advanced technologies, whatever they truly were, anti-gravity devices, sonic levitators, incredibly efficient energy sources, would have become increasingly difficult to maintain. Imagine trying to power your intricate machinery when the very resources needed for its fuel or repair are dwindling, or your highly specialized technicians are succumbing to dehydration. The grand engines of their civilization would have sputtered, choked, and finally fallen silent, their sophisticated hum replaced by the mournful whisper of the wind. And then, one day, they were gone, not in a flourish of defiance, not in a final, tragic battle. They simply ceased to be present. Did they dwindle to a handful of desperate souls, swallowed by the desert they had once so magnificently defied? Did they, in a final, agonizing act of the profound knowledge, manage to transcend this dying world, transporting themselves to some other, more hospitable realm, leaving only their colossal, enigmatic monuments as a final, mocking reminder of their failed triumph? Or perhaps they simply laid down, one by one, beneath the indifferent gaze of stars they had once studied with such fervent curiosity, until the last breath escaped the last throat, and the only sound left was the sigh of the wind across the sand. The pyramids, then, are not just tombs for kings, but perhaps the silent, colossal tombstones of an entire civilization. A civilization that reached heights we can scarcely comprehend, only to be brought low not by conquerors or internal strife, but by the relentless, slow unraveling of their world. A world that, piece by agonizing piece, simply fell apart, leaving behind only these impossible, enduring structures as a testament to their existence, a testament to their pride, and a haunting echo of their final, quiet despair. They built to last for eternity, and ironically, eternity chose to forget them, save for the colossal riddles they left behind. Imagine that. To build so grandly, only to vanish so completely, leaving only the dust motes of memory clinging to the impossible geometry of their final, silent farewell. Truly, a history for quiet contemplation, as the world outside continues its own slow, inevitable churn. And so, we find ourselves peering into profound silence that lies between the epochs, a vast, unwritten chasm separating the known from the utterly forgotten. If those colossal monuments, those mountainous geometric assertions against the ceaseless erosion of time, were indeed the legacy of a civilization predating what we conventionally understand as ancient Egypt, then a question of monumental weight settles upon us like a shroud of dust. What happened to them? How could an entire civilization, capable of engineering feats that still baffle us, simply vanish from the historical record, leaving behind only these enigmatic stone behemoths? This, my friends, is the tale of the Great Erasure. It is not a story of a sudden, cataclysmic meteor strike, nor a dramatic, apocalyptic flood. Though such things have, of course, occurred with tiresome regularity throughout our planet's long, indifferent existence. No, the erasure we contemplate here is far more insidious, a creeping oblivion, born of 1,000 tiny betrayals by time, nature, and the sheer, brutal indifference of the cosmos. Imagine, if you will, the twilight of such a civilization. Perhaps they reached the zenith of their power, their understanding of mathematics and engineering so profound that the manipulation of multi-ton granite blocks was merely an advanced exercise in geometry, a test of will against gravity itself. Perhaps they built not just the pyramids, but vast cities of unfired brick, intricate irrigation systems, monuments to deities whose names now whisper only in the wind that scours the desert. But even the mightiest civilizations are built on foundations of something perishable. Prosperity breeds complacency. Innovation slows. Resources dwindle. The climate, that fickle, omnipresent architect of fate, shifts its ancient patterns. Consider a gradual decline, a slow, imperceptible loosening of the threads that bind society together. The river, their lifeblood, changes its course, ever so slightly, year by year, pushing settlements further from its fertile banks, or conversely, inundating once arable land with relentless floods. The desert, their perpetual neighbor, encroaches with the slow, inexorable patience of geological time, burying verdant fields under shifting dunes, swallowing entire villages in its hungry embrace. Epidemics, those silent reapers, sweep through populations, leaving ghost towns where bustling markets once hummed. The collective memory begins to fray at the edges, generation by generation, as the practicalities of survival outweigh the luxury of historical record-keeping. Knowledge, once codified in perishable papyrus or brittle wooden tablets, turns to dust. Skills, once passed down meticulously, find fewer apprentices as the population thins and the infrastructure crumbles. The very materials of their daily lives would have conspired against their remembrance. The vast majority of their buildings outside of the monumental core of the pyramids would likely have been constructed from mud brick, wood, reeds, and other organic materials, the very fabric of civilization in a hot, dry climate. These humble, practical materials, so efficient for daily living, are the bane of the archaeologist. A few centuries of shifting sands, the occasional flash flood, the relentless gnawing of wind, and all but the most colossal stone structures are reduced to an indistinct mound of grit and pottery shards. The grandest palaces become barely discernible bumps in the landscape. The bustling ports, mere lines of erosion along ancient riverbanks. It is a peculiar irony that the very things that sustain life, water, air, organic matter, are also the most potent agents of oblivion. And then there are the pyramids themselves. They stand apart, defying this natural decay. Were they built as final, desperate assertions against the encroaching void? As messages to a future they could not envision? A future that might not even recognize them? Or were they simply the most enduring aspect of a civilization that never conceived of its own ultimate disappearance? Imagine the last generation of this precursor people, watching the sands consume their homes, their temples, their very way of life, while these immense, seemingly indestructible mountains of stone stood sentinel over a dying world. Perhaps they were seen not as monuments of triumph, but as silent, brooding reminders of what was, and what was irrevocably lost. When the first nomadic tribes, the precursors to what we now understand as the ancient Egyptians, ventured into the fertile ribbon of the Nile Valley, what did they find? A land strangely empty, yet dominated by these impossible structures. Vast, geometric mountains rising from the sand, their purpose unknown, their builders long vanished into the realm of myth. One can almost picture the scene. A weary scout, perhaps, topping a dune, his eyes widening in the shimmering heat as the colossal shapes resolve themselves against the horizon. No crumbling walls, no overgrown cities, no identifiable ruins to tell a tale. Just the pyramids, stark and undeniable, speaking only in profound silence of their age. What does humanity do when confronted with the inexplicable and the awe-inspiring? It creates a narrative. It fills the void. The new arrivals, with their own nascent deities and burgeoning pantheon, would have looked upon these structures and attributed them to forces beyond mortal comprehension. Gods, giants, ancient kings of immense power. Any explanation more comforting than the terrifying truth of an entire civilization simply disappearing. It is not an act of malicious erasure, perhaps, but one of convenient appropriation. These structures, so magnificent, so utterly there, demanded an explanation, a place within the new, unfolding cosmology. And so, they became the tombs of their pharaohs, the dwelling places of their gods, the enduring symbols of their dominion. The true builders, if they were remembered at all, would have faded into the mists of legend, their names twisting into unrecognizable whispers, their deeds absorbed and reinterpreted by the new narrative. The very act of subsequent occupation would have further sealed the fate of the original builders. Later Egyptians, utilizing the same land, would have built their own cities, often right on top of the older, forgotten settlements. New temples would rise on the foundations of ancient ones, recycling stone, obliterating layouts, burying the deeper past under layers of new construction. The desert itself, that grand, indiscriminate archive, will have continued its work, sifting fine particles over every remnant, sanding down sharp edges, blurring distinctions, patiently dismantling the very concept of historical layers. What little might remain of the precursor civilization, tucked away in some forgotten corner, would have been dismissed as primitive or irrelevant by the burgeoning, confident new Egyptian kingdoms. And so, we are left with this profound quiet. The pyramids stand, immutable and enigmatic, the very embodiment of the great erasure. They are the gravestones not just of kings, but of an entire epoch, a testament to the chilling ease with which time can swallow even the grandest human endeavors. A civilization, perhaps one far more advanced than we allow ourselves to imagine, simply cease to be, leaving behind only these silent, stony giants. They whisper a forgotten past, a void in our understanding, a chilling reminder that even the most monumental achievements can, in the end, be claimed by the slow, relentless grind of oblivion. All that effort, all that knowledge, all that ambition, reduced to a riddle wrapped in sand, a question echoing across millennia. We gaze upon the Great Pyramids of Giza, these colossal mountains of cut stone, and our minds, accustomed to neat explanations, immediately conjure images of pharaohs, slaves, and ramps. Thousands of sweating bodies, whips cracking in the desert air, dust coating lungs, muscles straining until sinews snapped like overtaut violin strings. A monumental feat of human endurance, certainly. But sometimes when the wind sighs just so across the ancient plateau, and the desert night cools the very rock, one cannot help but wonder if the story we tell ourselves is merely the most convenient, the most digestible, because the stone itself, you see, holds other whispers, faint, unsettling echoes of something far, far older, something more advanced, or perhaps simply something different. Consider the material, not just the limestone, which is formidable enough, quarried, hewn, and dragged with backbreaking effort, but the granite, the pink granite of Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. This isn't soft clay, easily molded by the artisan's hand. This is an igneous rock, formed from molten magma, interlocking crystals of quartz, feldspar, mica. It's notoriously hard, ranking high on the Mohs scale, tougher than iron, tougher than most of the tools available to early Bronze Age civilizations. To cut it, to shape it with the precision we observe, to drill through it with such astonishing accuracy it beggars belief, doesn't it? Imagine a copper chisel, dulling after mere seconds against such resistance. The endless hammering, the friction, the dust, a fine, insidious powder that would have coated every surface, every lung, grinding them slowly, inexorably into silicotic ruin. It's a slow, agonizing death, not a monument to a god king, but to the crushing inevitability of dust and disease. We are told of dolerite balls, pounding, grinding, slowly wearing away the stubborn rock. Imagine the sound, a ceaseless rhythmic thud, echoing across the Nile Valley for decades, perhaps centuries. The dull agony in hands, wrists, shoulders, the sheer, unyielding patience required. And for what? To achieve cuts so precise, so incredibly flat, that a modern engineer with diamond-tipped saws and laser levels might struggle to replicate them on such a scale. Blocks weighing tens, even hundreds of tons, fitted together with gaps, so fine you couldn't slip a razor blade between them. How? The answers were given feel insufficient, like trying to explain a symphony by describing the wood of the instruments. Then there are the numbers, the geometry, the astronomical alignments, the Great Pyramid, oriented with uncanny accuracy to true north, its sides aligned with the cardinal points to within a fraction of a degree, its angles, its proportions, embodying mathematical constants like pi and phi with startling precision. Were the ancient Egyptians truly such advanced geometers and astronomers, possessing a depth of knowledge we haven't fully accounted for? Or were they merely inheriting, perhaps even replicating, something they only dimly understood? A forgotten template, a set of instructions left behind by hands that measured the earth and the heavens with a different kind of eye, an eye that saw the world not as a flat plane, but as part of a grand, interconnected cosmic mechanism. Think of the logistics, not just moving blocks, but knowing precisely where each one needed to go, how it needed to be shaped, how it needed to be placed to achieve these incredible accuracies. This isn't just brute force. It's a vast, interconnected intelligence at work, an intelligence that seemed to vanish without a trace. And here is where the silence becomes deafening. For civilizations supposedly obsessed with chronicling their achievements, with carving every triumph and every ritual onto temple walls, the absence of detailed construction records for pyramids is peculiar. Where are the blueprints, the engineering schematics, the detailed daily logs of stone movement and worker management? We have released depicting everything from bread making to sandal making. But for the most monumental structures ever built by human hands, we have a curious dearth of practical how-to guides. It's as if a great architect built a modern skyscraper without leaving a single sketch, a single calculation, only commissioning a grand, celebratory fresco on its finished walls, depicting happy workers carrying small, manageable stones. It suggests, perhaps, that the actual process was not their own, or that it was so far beyond their everyday understanding that to document, it would be like us trying to sketch the inner workings of a quantum computer with charcoal on papyrus. Or, more unsettlingly, that the true builders simply didn't need to document it, because the knowledge was inherent, pervasive, woven into the very fabric of their being. A skill as natural as breathing, or perhaps as forgotten as the name of the last true star they gazed upon. So, let's indulge the quiet whisper. What if these echoes in stone are indeed just that? Faint vibrations of a civilization lost to the ceaseless grind of time, a culture wiped clean from the slate of human memory by some cataclysmic event, leaving only these immutable monuments as their silent, utterly baffling legacy. Imagine them, not necessarily aliens with glowing eyes and ray guns, but humans, perhaps, humans who diverged from our own evolutionary path far earlier, developing not technologies based on combustion and electricity, but something entirely different. Perhaps they mastered the manipulation of sound frequencies to levitate colossal weights. Perhaps they understood the resonant properties of stone in a way we have forgotten, allowing them to soften and reshape rock with ease, like clay in a potter's hands. Or perhaps their knowledge of geometry, of material science, of energy fields, was so profound that what appears miraculous to us was merely efficient engineering to them. Picture a society not driven by conquest or crude accumulation, but by a profound, almost spiritual understanding of cosmic order. Their cities, if they existed, might have been ephemeral, built of materials that decayed, leaving no trace. But their most sacred works, their grandest expressions, were meant to endure beyond cataclysm, beyond the rise and fall of lesser cultures, to stand as a silent message, a beacon of forgotten knowledge. For whom? For us? Or simply for the cosmos itself? a testament to their brief, brilliant passage across this terrestrial sphere. Why build something so incredibly resilient? Was it a power generator, harnessing telluric energies from the Earth's core? A gigantic astronomical observatory, mapping cycles far grander than our own paltry millennia? A colossal library, its books encoded within the very structure of the stones themselves, waiting for an age when humanity might once again possess the key to unlock their secrets? Or was it simply a tomb, not for a king, but for a knowledge, a way of being, a civilization that knew its end was near? And what became of them? The most chilling question of all. Did they simply fade, a slow societal decay, leaving the structures as lonely monuments to a decline? Or was there a sudden, devastating event, a cosmic impact, a global flood, a shift in the Earth's axis, a solar flare of unprecedented intensity? Something that not only erased their cities and their records, but also shattered the very memory of their existence from the collective consciousness of the survivors. The desert you see is not merely sand. It is a vast, patient eraser slowly scrubbing away the inconvenient truths, leaving only the most stubborn of marks. The Great Pyramids, then, are not just engineering marvels of a nascent civilization. They are monumental questions, etched in stone, echoing across tens of thousands of years. They stand as a silent testament to a grandeur we struggle to comprehend, a precision we can barely replicate, and a disappearance we cannot fathom. They are not merely tombs for ancient kings. They might be the last defiant gasp of a forgotten world, reaching out from the abyss of prehistory, whispering to us of what was and what might have been. The echoes remain, faint yet persistent, vibrating through the bedrock of time, inviting us to listen more closely to the story the stones themselves want to tell. We stand before them, these impossible mountains of stone, bleached bone white by millennia of sun, casting shadows that stretch like weary giants across the ochre sands. The Great Pyramids of Giza, we are told and we accept that they are the enduring monuments of the ancient Egyptians, crafted by a colossal workforce, fueled by ingenuity, sweat, and almost unimaginable will. We picture the teams, the ramps, the straining muscles, the copper chisels biting reluctantly into limestone, the rhythmic chanting against the relentless desert wind. It is a compelling narrative, one that speaks to the indomitable spirit of humanity. And for a long, long time, it has been enough. A comforting, neatly packaged explanation for one of the world's most profound enigmas. But sometimes, as the dust motes dance and slivers of light penetrating the narrow passages, or as the last rays of twilight paint the colossal blocks in hues of bruised purple and blood orange, a quieter, more unsettling thought begins to stir. It is a thought that crawls in the deepest, most shadowed corners of our collective unconscious, whispering of something else entirely, something grander, perhaps, or simply something far more chilling. Because if you truly let your mind wander beyond accompanying certainties, if you allow yourself to scrutinize the sheer, impossible precision, the staggering scale, the flawless alignment with celestial bodies that would have required instruments beyond the wildest dreams of early dynastic Egypt, the neatly packaged explanation begins to fray the edges. These aren't just big piles of rocks. These are monuments carved with a surgical exactitude that defies the supposed tools of their age. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber, cut from a single, unyielding block, its interior hollowed out with a precision that would challenge modern laser-guided machinery, fits through the narrow passage leading to its final resting place by mere millimeters, not inches, millimeters, and it was placed there before the chamber was sealed. How do you carve something like that from the unforgiving heart of a mountain, move it countless miles, and then slide it into a meticulously fashioned slide, all with bronze tools and sheer manpower? The official explanations, with their ramps and their legionnaires, begin to sound less like engineering feats and more like a beautifully crafted bedtime story designed to soothe our anxious, logical minds. What if, for a moment, we allowed ourselves to consider that the story we've been told is merely the one we can comprehend? What if the true builders of these silent testaments were not the people we imagine, but civilizations so utterly alien to our understanding of ancient that their very existence has been meticulously, comprehensively erased from the historical records, not necessarily extraterrestrial, though the desert night sky often makes one ponder, perhaps a branch of humanity or a parallel lineage, that ascended, flourished, and then vanished with finality that beggars belief, leaving only these immense, enigmatic markers as their epitaph. Imagine their methods, not the straining grunts of men dragging sledges, the constant whip-crack over bent backs, the agonizingly slow inching forward. No, imagine a silence, deep and profound, broken only by a low, resonant hum emanating from vast, unseen machines. Imagine stones not hewn with brute force, but subtly, precisely altered at a molecular level. Perhaps they were floated not on rafts across the Nile, but on fields of modulated gravity, drifting through the air like clouds, guided by operators with detached, clinical efficiency. The precise cuts, the impossibly smooth surfaces, the interlocking blocks fitting with an almost organic perfection. These wouldn't be the result of endless toil and trial and error, but a planned output of technology that understood the very fabric of matter, a tool that could soften granite like clay, then harden it again with thought, precisely where needed, or perhaps a sonic device, emitting a focused hum at just the right frequency to vibrate rock apart along predetermined fault lines, leaving smooth, unblemished surfaces. The scale of the project would not have been an engineering challenge for them, but a design exercise, the placement of each stone, not a monumental lift, but the final click of a piece into an intricate, cosmic puzzle. Their labor force, if any, might have been biological, but not in the way we understand it. Perhaps bioengineered automatons, or creatures bred for sheer, unthinking strength and obedience. Their lives expendable, their suffering irrelevant to the grand, meticulous vision. The dark humor, if one can call it that, is in thought of their sheer, cold detachment. The pyramids would be less a testament to struggle and more mathematical proof, a geometric expression of their command over natural laws, a colossal, silent blueprint left behind. Mocking our best efforts to decipher its true meaning with our clumsy tools and our limited imaginations, what drove them to build such monstrous structures? Was it truly a tomb for a king, or was that merely the convenient narrative adopted by the inheritors of this forgotten landscape? Perhaps these weren't tombs at all, but power generators, drawing energy from the Earth's core or from the very fabric of space-time, their purpose lost in the sands of ages. Or perhaps they were markers, giant navigational beacons for a return that never came. Or, most unsettlingly, they were the only things they could build, the last desperate act of dying civilization trying to encode their very existence into an indestructible medium before their final, horrifying erasure. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. No grand battles, no environmental collapse we can trace. Just silence, a silence so profound that it consumed not just their cities, their art, their written language, but even the very memory of their name. They are the ultimate testament to oblivion, a stark reminder that even the most advanced, the most powerful civilizations can be swallowed whole by time, leaving only the most resilient of their creations behind. The pyramids stand immutable, impassive, watching millennia drift by, whispering secrets to the indifferent desert winds. And we, the fleeting inheritors of this ancient world, gaze upon them, humbled, awestruck, and utterly wonderfully, terrifyingly lost in contemplation of what truly lies beneath those silent, sun-baked stones. They are the last lingering echoes of forgotten world, standing as quiet, colossal monuments to our own profound ignorance. And so they stand, the Great Pyramids of Giza, monuments of unparalleled scale, etched into the very consciousness of humanity. For millennia, they have inspired awe, sparked myths, and silently defied the relentless march of time. We gaze upon them, and we tell ourselves stories. Tales of pharaohs, of millions of laborers toiling under a scorching sun, of ingenious architects, and a civilization that flourished along the fertile banks of the Nile, reaching for the heavens with stone and ambition. This is our narrative. It is comfortable, well-rehearsed, etched into our textbooks and documentary scripts. A story that neatly ties a bow on one of history's grandest enigmas. But what if, beneath the comforting veneer of our established knowledge, the truth is far more unsettling? What if the very foundations of this accepted history are built not on solid ground, but on a vast, shifting ocean of forgotten time? Imagine for a moment that the towering structures we attribute to the industrious, Sun-worshipping Egyptians were, in fact, the final melancholic legacy of a civilization we have utterly, completely, and irrevocably forgotten. A civilization so ancient, so utterly wiped from the slate of collective memory, that even their name echoes in no dusty tone, no whispered legend, no obscure hieroglyph. Consider the sheer, terrifying scale of such a loss. Not merely a few missing scrolls, not just a dynasty lost in a coup or a city swallowed by an earthquake, its ruins later excavated and meticulously catalogued. No, we speak here of the complete, total erasure of an entire people. Their cities, their art, their languages, their philosophies, their wars, their loves, their very existence, all ground into finest dust by the millstones of millennia, leaving behind only these colossal, silent sentinels. Their final desperate attempt at immortality, hijacked by the relentless amnesia of the ages. How could such a profound disappearance occur? The world is a vast and different place in time, its most brutal sculptor. Perhaps it was a cataclysmic event, a natural disaster of such magnitude that it left no survivors, no witnesses. Imagine a mega tsunami born from a distant asteroid strike, sweeping across continents, scouring coastlines clean, dragging every vestige of a coastal empire into the abyssal depths, or a series of supervolcanic eruptions, raining ash and darkness for decades, choking the land, poisoning the air, burying entire metropolises under meters of sterile gray. A global plague, not just of the body, but the mind, wiping out complex thought and leaving behind only a few scattered, feral remnants, incapable of transmitting the intricate knowledge of their forebears. Or perhaps it was a slower, more insidious obliteration, the relentless march of the desert, silently encroaching, burying fields, then villages, then cities, grain by grain, year after year, until entire civilizations were entombed beneath mountains of sand, indistinguishable from dunes themselves. The wind, a patient artisan of decay, polishing away all but the hardest stones, then even those, atom by atom, the relentless sun bleaching, drying, crumbling every organic trace, turning textiles to dust, papyrus to unreadable ash, and bones to chalk. The quiet horror of knowing that entire societies have simply been erased by the elements, leaving behind only the most resilient and the most misleading monuments. And what of humanity's own role in this erasure? History is a palimpsest, where one story is written over another, often with deliberate force. Conquerors routinely demolish the temples and monuments of the vanquished, building their own on the rubble, burying the old gods under new foundations. Successor civilizations, perhaps finding these enigmatic structures already standing, attributed them to their own pantheon, their own kings, weaving them into their emerging myths. Did the early Egyptians, discovering these ancient edifices, simply incorporate them into their own narrative, perhaps seeing them as the work of primeval gods or long-vanished, legendary ancestors, without truly knowing who or what they were? They simply laid claim, as cultures are wont to do, to that which they encountered and could not otherwise explain. The true legacy of such forgotten people, then, would not be found in the grandiosity of their achievements, but in the terrifying silence of their absence. The pyramids, in this light, become not symbols of triumph, but epitaphs written in stone for a graveyard memory so vast it stretches beyond our comprehension. They are the only surviving words of a language we cannot translate. The final notes of a song whose melody is lost forever. We look at them and see the Egyptians. We think we understand, but our understanding is merely a shadow play, cast by our own limited light, upon the impenetrable wall of true antiquity. Our ignorance, in this context, is not a simple lack of information. It is a fundamental blindness, a profound inability to perceive the vast chasms of lost history that yawn around the few scattered islands of what we do remember. We pride ourselves on our archaeological prowess, our ability to reconstruct the past from shards of pottery and fragments of bone. Yet, imagine an entire civilization, spanning millennia, whose bones have long since dissolved into the soil, whose pottery has been ground to the very sand beneath our feet. What then? How do you excavate nothing? How do you read an absence? The grim humor, if one can call it that, lies in the fact that these colossal structures, the very embodiment of permanence, serve as a monument not to their celebrated builders, but to the crushing indifference of time. They are the ultimate cosmic prank, allowing us to believe we understand a past that is, in truth, an unfathomable abyss. We assign them a date, a purpose, a cultural context, all based on circumstantial evidence from a later, and perhaps entirely separate, civilization that merely occupied the same patch of desert. The actual creators, their faces and names, their hopes and fears, their intricate societal structures, their very existence are less than dust. They are a vacuum. This quiet horror suggests that humanity's historical record is not a continuous scroll, but a series of fragmented tablets, many of which have been shattered, their pieces scattered to the winds, and some, perhaps, never even written down in a form that could endure. The pyramids in this scenario are akin to finding a single, perfectly crafted tooth from a creature we never knew existed, from a species that left no other trace. We can marvel at the tooth, hypothesize about its owner, but the true beast, its roaring life, its place in an ancient ecology, remains utterly, maddeningly unknowable. Perhaps the greatest irony is that these structures, so often seen as a testament to the enduring power of human will, might instead be the starkest reminder of its utter futility. For even the most ambitious, the most technologically advanced, the most meticulously organized civilization will be swallowed whole by the currents of deep time. Their grandest monuments may persist, but stripped of context, of meaning, of the very memory of their creators, they become something else entirely. A cosmic placeholder, a question mark carved into the bedrock of the world. And we, the inheritors of this bewildering planet, stand before them, confidently supplying our own answers, unaware that we are merely projecting our own shadows onto the blank slate of a truly forgotten past. It is our ignorance of vast and terrifying void that allows us to claim their legacy as our own. And so, we are left with these colossal question marks, looming on the horizon, silently mocking our meticulously constructed timelines. The sheer, undeniable scale of the Great Pyramids of Giza defies the neat, linear progression we imprint upon history. Their construction, an act of staggering ambition and logistical prowess, feels less like an ancient civilization's crowning achievement and more like a fevered dream etched in stone. We speak of copper tools, of ramps, of immense, coordinated labor forces, yet the details remain stubbornly, chillingly vague. It's almost as if the raw, bleeding truth of how those millions of tons of stone were dragged, lifted, and perfectly placed was not merely lost to the desert winds, but was never meant for our ears. What if the answer wasn't simpler, but merely older? What if the hands that hewed these mountains of stone belonged to a people not merely forgotten, but utterly, systematically erased from the annals of time, leaving only their impossibly heavy fingerprints behind? Imagine, if you will, a civilization not unlike our own in complexity, yet utterly alien in priorities. A society whose very existence was predicated on a scale of ambition that makes our skyscrapers seem like child's play. They wouldn't have been simple folk, toiling under a primitive sun. No, they would have been the giants. Not necessarily in stature, though the mind toys with that unsettling image, but giants in vision, in organization, in chilling capacity for sustained effort. Picture a world where the very air hummed with unseen industry, where vast networks of production and transport stretched across continents, not for trade, but for a singular monumental purpose. Structures designed to outlast not just centuries, but epochs. Structures meant to whisper across millennia, even if the whisper was devoid of a name. The burden of such forgotten giants begins, of course, with a how. Forget the romanticized images of thousands of sweating laborers hauling blocks with ropes under the whip. That scale of brute force, while impressive, still feels insufficient, inefficient. No, these forgotten builders mastered something far more profound than mere physics. The physics of will. Perhaps they understood resonance in ways we only dream of, manipulating stone not through brute force, but through applied vibrational frequencies that rendered it pliable, almost liquid for brief, agonizing moments. Or perhaps their command over vast workforces was absolute, a hierarchical pyramid of human endeavor mirroring the structures they erected, where descent was not merely punished, but unfathomable. Think of the sheer volume of material. Quarries emptied, landscapes reshaped not by natural forces, but by an insatiable hunger for stone. The dust, the endless, choking dust, would have been their perpetual shroud. clinging to every worker, every leader, every single cold block. Consider the human cost, an almost unbearable weight hovering over these silent monuments. Not merely the lives lost to accident or exhaustion, though those would have been legion, ground into bedrock like forgotten sand, but the lives lived within the shadow of these projects. Generations born, raised, and dying with the same monotonous, back-breaking rhythm of quarrying, shaping, moving. Personal identity would have been a luxury. Their legacy was not their name, but the infinitesimal contribution of a single breath, a single swing of a tool, a single drop of sweat, to a structure so vast as swallowed individual existence whole. Their collective consciousness, perhaps, was the only thing that mattered. A vast, interconnected hive mind dedicated to the supreme task. A task whose purpose remains as opaque to us as the secrets held within the pyramid's granite heart. And why? What grand, overarching imperative drove a civilization to pour its very essence, its every resource, its every living soul into such an undertaking? Were they monuments to a forgotten god, one whose demands were so absolute that even mountains had to bend? Were they colossal energy collectors, harnessing forces we cannot even perceive, designed to power a civilization on the brink, a last desperate gamble against oblivion? Or perhaps, and this is the most chilling thought, they were a legacy, not for us, but for them. A final, defiant testament against a doom they knew was coming. Impossibly complex time capsules, designed to preserve a sliver of their knowledge, their essence, for a distant future they would never see. The burden, then, was their own. The crushing weight of foresight, the terrifying knowledge of an inevitable end, driving them to build these silent sentinels against the coming dark. And vanish they did. The silence of their disappearance is perhaps more profound than the thunder of their construction. How does a civilization capable of such monumental feats simply cease to exist, leaving no other trace? No cities beyond the pyramids, no extensive written records, no tools crude by comparison. Did they crumble from within, their grand project consuming them utterly, leaving a skeletal society too weak to survive? Did a natural catastrophe of unimaginable scale wipe them clean from the earth, leaving only the works they specifically designed to withstand such cataclysms? Or was it something far more deliberate, far more unsettling? A self-erasure, a planned, meticulous removal of all evidence, leaving only a puzzle for an unknowing future. Perhaps they shed their physical forms, transcending to another plane of existence, leaving their stone monuments as a final, mocking reminder of what mortal hands can achieve before abandoning the flesh. The very idea gives rise to a prickle of unease, that the earth can simply swallow entire empires, leaving not even a ghost of a whisper. This is the burden of the forgotten giants, the weight of their impossible legacy on our fragile shoulders. For us, the burden is not of physical labor, but of intellectual strain, of unsettling uncertainty that gnaws the edges of our meticulously constructed understanding of history. To admit that such a civilization existed, thrived, and then vanished without a trace, is to admit to a profound gap in our knowledge, a yawning chasm into which our comfortable narratives might tumble. It forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that history is not a continuous, unbroken chain of progress, but a fractured, incomplete tapestry, riddled with holes where entire epics have been excised, entire people simply gone. The pyramids stand as an enduring monument not just to forgotten builders, but to our own ignorance. Their silent presence a constant, almost condescending reminder of what we do not know, what we cannot know. They are the ultimate cold case files. These pyramids, witnesses without voices, structures without authors. They bear the subtle, imperceptible scars of millennia, the harsh caress of desert winds, the relentless assault of time itself. Yet they endure, and in their enduring, silent strength, they carry the true burden, the weight of a forgotten purpose, the weight of countless lives anonymously expended, the weight of an entire civilization's ambition, now reduced to an inscrutable riddle. They stand vast and indifferent, under the same sun that baked the skin of their long-dead creators, and the same stars that watch them rise. And as the desert night descends, cloaking the ancient stones in shadow, one might almost hear the faint, echoing sigh of those forgotten giants, a mournful whisper carried on the wind. Asterisk, we were here. We built this, and you will never truly know why. asterisk in that profound silence. The true burden of their forgotten existence settles upon us, heavy and irrefutable, like the countless tons of stone upon the desert floor.